Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It is very clear that this USC team is different in 2024 than what it was in 2023. But I think a large part of the reason this USC team looks so much better is you're getting a lot of surprise performances from some players that, were kind of flying under the radar heading into the 2024 year. Now, you look at a guy like Miller Moss, at least the USC fans, y'all knew what you had during the offseason. That might be a surprise standout for a lot of the national media members, but the USC fans, y'all certainly knew what you had with Miller Moss. That being said, there are a lot of other players on this team that I think have played exceptional football throughout the first 2 weeks. Want to give some love to five names as I continue to go back and watch these games. I think are really standing out in a big way. Now, before we get into it, as always, I think the beauty of this kind of episode, there's probably 20 names that deserve to be mentioned in this episode. So I'm going to pick my top five. Would love for you guys to let it fly in the comment section in terms of, some of those surprise players that have played really good football that you weren't necessarily giving a ton of attention to 4 or 5 weeks ago. So let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Again, the USC fans, y'all continue to show a ton of love to the boys. I can't thank you guys enough. And without further ado, let's start off with arguably playing like the best offensive lineman on this team. That's right tackle Mason Murphy. We kind of headed into the 2024 season saying, hey, we feel pretty dang good about the starting four offensive linemen, starting at left tackle, going to the right guard. Our biggest question mark was, what was the right tackle position going to look like? Mason Murphy obviously returning as a starter, but didn't look that great in 2023. This kid's been phenomenal to start the season. And you look at Mason Murphy's number 72 pass per opportunities, giving up 0 sacks, only one quarterback hurry. I think's been an animal in the run game as well. You look at the starting five for USC with Mason Murphy playing the football that he is, you're suddenly not that concerned about this USC offensive line holding up as they get into the Big Ten schedule. Mason Murphy, a pleasant surprise, a guy that I'll kind of raise my hand about and say I have big question marks about Mason Murphy going into the Big Ten in 2024. The dude's been awesome, deserves a lot of credit. Now, the next player I want to talk about, and a guy that I certainly missed on in the offseason. And the USC fans, you guys would consistently let me hear it in the comment section. That's why I love talking USC football. Is y'all show a ton of support, but if I'm talking crazy, you guys let me know. Tight end Lake McCree has been awesome. And you go back 3 weeks ago, I was talking about USC going 4 wide receiver sets and trying to get all that playmaking ability at the wide receiver position on the field at the same time, which, look, certainly I think you're going to see USC go to some 4 wide receiver sets, but they are utilizing these tight ends. And kind of coming into the year, I said, look, I don't think USC has a difference maker at the tight end position. I'm not saying you don't play with the tight end, but I'm saying that you might be taking a look at trying to get all these wide receivers on the football field. I was wrong. As wrong as you can be. You look up Lake McCree's leading this USC team in receiving yards with how much talent there is in the wide receiver room. That is a phenomenal stat for Lake McCree. I think the favorite thing I love about Lake McCree so far is he's been targeted 9 times. He's caught all 9 targets. What are you looking for in a tight end at the very least is a reliable tight end that's working the middle of the field and catching the balls that he needs to catch. That's been Lake McCree, but he hasn't just been your average tight end. You take a look at some of the throw charts here. I mean, 4 catches, 10 plus yards down the field. This is a matchup nightmare tight end, and you're seeing USC go to 2 tight end sets. I think Lincoln Riley a lot higher on the tight end position than I was 3 weeks ago because these tight ends are getting used. They're getting used a lot. And I would say, again, Lake McCree has been a dog in the run blocking department. So not only is Lake McCree emerging as a true difference maker in the passing game, I think that's probably the pass catcher that Miller Moss has the most confidence in through 2 weeks of the season. And Miller Moss or Lake McCree, I should say, is not a liability in the run game. In fact, I think he's a massive asset. He's not necessarily the biggest, most imposing tight end, but you talk about the mentality that, hey, I'm going to block my tail off every single time I'm asked to do so. Like Lake McCree has done that at an exceptional level. I am fired up about Lake McCree. Couldn't have been more wrong about Lake McCree to start the 2024 season. Plays exceptional football. Now, going over to the defensive side of the football, this is where you could probably shout out almost every player on this defense. Let's go to a guy that we talked about extensively during the offseason in terms of a unicorn kid that we're just really excited to see how Coach Lynn decides to use Eric Gentry multiple different ways. Eric Gentry's been the best player on this USC defense, at least in my mind. Probably him and Kamari Ramsey, who Kamari Ramsey deserves to be on this list. He's not on this list because we kind of knew he was a good football player coming from UCLA. Look at Eric Gentry. He leads the team in tackles, 14 tackles. He leads the team in run stops by 2-1. He has 6 run stops. The next closest player on this USC defense only has 3. The average depth of tackle on Eric Gentry's run stops has been 1.3 yards down the field. Eric Gentry is working downhill. He's making his tackles in space. He's one of those rangy linebackers that can operate in coverage. But I think what I'm most excited about in terms of Eric Gentry is the diversity in which Dan Lynn is deciding to use Eric Gentry. You take a look at the snap count distribution. He's got 3.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. A lot of that is because, hey, we're not just going to treat Eric Gentry like a stereotypical off-ball linebacker, which he certainly can play and plays it at a high level. There's so much more to this kid's game. You're seeing Eric Gentry walk up along the line of scrimmage, be asked to be an edge rusher, where he has a 14.3% pass rush win rate. He's been extremely physical at the point of attack for a linebacker that was our biggest concern coming in. Hey, we love Eric Gentry in terms of the length and athleticism and how he flies around the football field, but can he take on blocks? Can he be that physical linebacker that we're going to need in the Big Ten? This kid's been that and more. And so he's kind of combining those freaky athletic traits in terms of the range and the length he presents, but also being a physical thumping linebacker in the tackle box, which you're going to need in the Big Ten. We were all excited about Eric Gentry with this new defensive coaching staff coming in. It's lived up to our excitement throughout the first 2 weeks of the season. Going to the back end, and let's talk about a player that, again, just kind of flew under the radar because of the transfer portal additions that were made. Jacoby Covington, who's been on this USC roster since, 2022? He is a starting cornerback, and he's playing phenomenal football. Might be the best cornerback on this USC team throughout the first 2 weeks. What I love most about Jacoby Covington and where we kind of missed on this kid is we kind of got not distracted, but excited about DeCarlos Nicholson and John Humphreys coming in as those long cornerbacks. That's kind of what Coach Lynn wants to use. Talk about long physical cornerbacks. You had one sitting on your roster in Jacoby Covington. We just didn't talk about him. And at 6'2", 200 pounds, he is tackling exceptionally well. He's got 8 tackles on the year, hasn't missed a tackle. He played very well against LSU. Jacoby Covington has emerged as a legitimate boundary cornerback starter for USC. And when we kind of knew when Jacoby Covington won that starting job and we saw a lot of him against LSU, we kind of knew he was going to be good because we knew DeCarlos Nicholson was good. We knew that John Humphreys was good. Jacoby Covington has probably been the best cornerback for USC so far, probably outside of Greedy Vance at the nickel spot. I've been extremely excited about Jacoby Covington, and you're starting to see a little bit of depth on this USC roster get developed. You got probably, if you include Jalen Smith into that conversation, 4 or 5 cornerbacks that you really trust on the boundary for USC. But most importantly, all of these cornerbacks are tackling exceptionally well, which you are going to need because you look at the Big Ten, obviously a run-heavy conference, but a lot of the Big Ten passing attacks are perimeter passing attacks where we're going to get the ball out in space on some slip screens and try to let our wide receivers operate in space. You need cornerbacks that can come up and tackle. Jacoby Covington has done that. It's been phenomenal throughout the first 2 weeks. Really, really impressed by Jacoby Covington. Last guy I want to talk about, and it's not going to stand out at the stat sheet. We talked about this when he transferred in, Nate Clifton. Nate Clifton at 6'4", 295 is playing on the inside of the USC defensive line. And specifically in that LSU football game, this kid was awesome. And it's not, I mean, you look at the box score, say 0 tackles for a loss, 0 sacks, 2 tackles on the season. How is he standing out? You watch the games, Nate Clifton has been an animal. You talk about why the linebackers have had so much success behind this USC defensive line. You got guys like Nate Clifton. I'd throw in Gavin Mayer into that conversation, as well as guys that they're not flashing in terms of tackles for loss and getting into the backfield, but they're doing a great job two-gapping. The gap discipline has been phenomenal for this USC defense. Why are the linebackers playing such good football? I would say it has a lot to do with, obviously, Coach Ent's coming in. Give him credit, a ton of credit. This defensive line is so much more physical at the point of attack. I mean, Nate Clifton two-gap and taking on double teams against what I think is the best offensive line in the country at LSU. it's dirty work. It's not necessarily going to get talked about by the national media, but a kid like Nate Clifton, Gavin Mayer, two guys who are, kind of undersized for interior defensive linemen, have been playing their tail off and aren't going to get the recognition they deserve. But again, you talk about why the linebackers have been so good. It's because they're coming downhill free because this defensive line is doing their job at the point of attack. And again, we kind of talked about this. What's one of the big differences between Coach Lynn and Alex Grinch? It's going to be a lot more that we're not going to slant. We're not going to try to get super vertical. We're going to be really gap disciplined and let our linebackers do the heavy lifting, which they've done a phenomenal job of. But you need defensive linemen who can stay in their gaps and be disciplined and be physical at the point of attack. Nate Clifton's been that dude. Gavin Mayer as well. Bear Alexander, who I think is one of the most talented interior defensive linemen we see in the country, is probably playing like the third defensive lineman in this rotation right now. That's how good Nate Clifton and Gavin Mayer have been. And again, it's not flashy like Bear was last year. It's just hard-nosed football, disciplined football, and that is what Coach Lynn brings to the table. Those are the five I got. Again, so many other names that we really could include. Would love for you guys to let it fly in the comments section. Give some love to some players that I maybe missed out on. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.